the small one among giants. The Valley of Theroin was a land where the sky brushed the shoulders of mountains and thunder spoke in the voices of walking giants. It was a realm where strength wasn't just respected, it was worshipped. Entire tales were carved into canyon walls detailing the heroic feats of the stone-skinned Goric giants, who could shatter trees with claps and cause landslides with their stomps. To be strong in Theroin was to be worthy. So when a human appeared at the edge of their sacred arena, wearing nothing more than a traveler's cloak and a calm expression, the giants laughed until their stomachs ached. "Who let the twig wander in?" one of them bellowed, his laughter echoing like a quake. "Careful, or a breeze might carry him away," another rumbled, slapping his granite thigh. The human, whose name was Kale, stood without flinching. The dust of the journey still clung to his boots. His face bore no smugness, no anger, just quiet determination and a glint in his eyes that flickered like fire waiting to be unleashed. He looked like nothing compared to the towering creatures before him. The smallest giant stood thrice his height and 20 times his weight. Their muscles looked like hills, their limbs like carved statues. Even the youngest among them could snap trees for kindling. The elder of the Goric, an ancient giant whose beard had turned to silver stone, stomped forward and gazed down with curiosity. "You seek something, little one," the elder said. "Speak it." "I seek to lift the trial stone," Kale answered, his voice unwavering. The laughter returned immediately, louder this time, shaking birds from trees and loosening rocks from cliffs. The trial stone was no ordinary boulder. It was the heart of their strength mythos, a relic said to be shaped by the first giant's hand. For times the size of a beast wagon, it sat rooted in the earth like it had been born there. Even most giants couldn't budge it. Only 3 had ever lifted it, and all became war chiefs. "You waste our time," sneered Grogar, the current war chief, his arms like tree trunks, voice like gravel and fire. "That stone does not suffer jokes." Kale's gaze didn't flinch. "I do not jest. You are a man of words, not brawn," Grogar growled. "What makes you think flesh so thin can move what our ancestors left behind?" Kale pulled back his cloak and set down his bag. From it, he removed a small wooden idol, carved like a human figure bearing a heavy stone on its back. He placed it gently on the ground. "My people don't measure strength in muscle alone," he said. "We measure it in will." Grogar squinted. "Then your people are fools." The elder raised a massive hand and the giants quieted. "There is an old law," the elder said, voice like shifting rock. "Any who step into the circle and challenge the trial stone may attempt it. But know this, human, failure is no light thing. Many giants have broken their backs, their pride, their spirits upon that rock." Kale simply nodded. They led him to the trial arena, a flattened plateau surrounded by giant pillars of stone, each carved with runes of past victors. And in the center, like a sunken meteor, sat the trial stone. Obsidian dark and veined with veins of molten red, it pulsed faintly under the light of the twin suns. Kale approached it as the crowd gathered on cliff edges above. Giant eyes blinked in curiosity. Some whispered bets, others readied jeers. He walked around it once, studying its form. No obvious grip points. The weight would be immense. It would crush most men before they could shift their knees. Kale crouched beside it and laid one hand against its cold surface. He closed his eyes and remembered. He remembered the cave-in that had trapped his family. The screams, the darkness, the impossible weight of rock between him and those he loved. He remembered clawing at stone with bleeding hands, refusing to stop, even as others gave up. He remembered lifting, heaving stones thrice his size, driven by nothing but sheer desperation and love. And he remembered the day he dug them free, alone, with nothing but broken fingers, splintered bones, and raw willpower. He hadn't done it to prove anything. He'd done it because no one else could. The trial stone growled beneath his fingers, as though sensing the memory. Kale opened his eyes, and then he moved. There was no ceremony, no chant, no pose of power, just a breath. He squatted low, wrapped his arms beneath the impossible weight, and exhaled slowly. His body tensed. Muscles along his arms trembled. Legs rooted like steel into the ground. The strain hit him instantly, like standing beneath a collapsing mountain. The crowd fell into silence. Veins bulged along his neck. Sweat poured from his brow. But he didn't grunt, didn't scream, didn't flinch. He whispered to the stone, "You're not heavier than my heart once was." And then, the trial stone shifted. A groan rippled through the ground. Dust danced upward. Pebbles rolled away. Giant eyes widened. Some gasped. Kale's feet dug deeper. His arms screamed in agony. His vision blurred. But the stone was rising. Slowly, surely, by inches, then by feet. It hung in his grip, high enough for the air to pass beneath it. Dead silence followed. The entire valley held its breath. Then, the trial stone slammed back into the earth as Kale gently set it down and collapsed to one knee, chest heaving. Not a single giant laughed. Not a word was spoken, until the elder stepped forward, eyes shimmering with something ancient, respect. "You have done what only 3 of our greatest could," he said quietly. "And you carry not stone in your muscles, but in your soul." Grogar stepped back, silent, jaw clenched. Kale stood, trembling but steady. "I did not come to rule," he said, "only to prove that strength is not owned by size." The elder turned to the gathered giants and raised his voice. "Let it be known, strength wears many forms, and today, a man taught giants to see." From the cliffs, one by one, the giants began to pound fists to chests. Not in mockery, but in solemn honor. The sound echoed through Theroin, not as laughter, but as thunderous respect. A seat among titans. The day after Kale lifted the trial stone, the skies above the valley of Theroin felt different. Quieter, heavier, like they too were still stunned by what had taken place. The whispers of wind carried stories now, and the cliffs themselves seemed to lean in, listening to a tale that would ripple through generations of giants. Kale awoke to the scent of burning herbs and the rhythmic beat of stone drums. He'd been given a cavern chamber within the Hall of Titans, something no outsider, let alone a human, had ever been granted. Pillars stretched overhead like petrified trees, and the stone bedding beneath him was surprisingly smooth, warmed by subterranean veins that pulsed with geothermal life. Despite the aches in his body, muscles pulled to their edge, tendons sore like harp strings after a hard song. He rose and dressed without complaint. Pain was temporary, but purpose, that lived forever. As he stepped into the grand hall, the giants fell silent again. Not from mockery this time, but acknowledgement. Their eyes, once filled with amusement, now held something deeper. Curiosity, respect, and for a few, concern. "Kale," boomed the elder, seated on a throne carved from the fossilized jawbone of a sky beast. "Today we speak of your place among us." Kale bowed his head. "I do not ask for titles. That is what makes you worthy of one," the elder said. Grogar stood nearby, arms folded like boulders stacked. His expression unreadable, but his silence was louder than any roar. "By law," the elder continued, "those who lift the trial stone are offered a seat on the Council of Might. We have not added a new voice in 3 generations. Kale took a step forward. "I do not know your laws, nor do I seek to change your ways. I only wish to be heard." "Then sit," the elder said, "and speak." The council hall was a half-circle carved into the mountain itself. 12 stone chairs, each the size of a cottage, formed the curve. At the far end sat the elder. One chair, the 13th, had always remained empty, carved smaller than the others. Not because it was unfinished, but because it was waiting for something different. Kale walked to it and sat. The chamber exhaled. Not just the giants, but the very stones, as if even they approved. Grogar's voice cut through the stillness. "So a human takes the 13th seat. What next? Will we ask insects to shape policy? Let birds lead war?" His words were sharp, but his tone controlled. Grogar was no fool. He saw the tide shifting and aimed to steer it back. He took the stone, rumbled Vargul, another counselor. The law speaks. Laws are forged by minds, Grogar retorted. And minds err. Strength must not be confused with spectacle. Kale looked up at the war chief. I did not come to challenge your rule. Grogar leaned in. Then why did you come, little one? Kale was silent a moment, and then he spoke. When I was young, a mountain near my village collapsed during a quake, trapped families, shattered roads. For days no one came to help. My people, they died, buried by the earth they once worshipped. He took a breath. I swore that day I would never again wait for giants to move. I would become what my people needed, even if it broke me. The words weren't dramatic. They weren't shouted, but they burned. Even Grogar felt it. You think your suffering makes you strong? Grogar sneered. No, Kale said. But what I chose to do with it does. The elder raised a hand. Let the council decide. Today the 13th seat is filled. Let us speak no more of should. It is. Now we move forward. Outside the council chambers, Kale was approached by Vargul, a younger giant with obsidian-black skin and copper markings tattooed along his arms. You've stirred a mountain's worth of trouble, Vargul said, crouching beside Kale with a rumbling grin. Kale nodded. Seems to follow me. I like that, Vargul said. Tell me, human, can your kind teach that kind of strength? Kale raised an eyebrow. What kind? Vargul pointed to Kale's chest. The kind that doesn't come from arms. The kind that gets back up even after hope has died. Kale looked up at him. I can't promise to teach it, but I can show you where it's born. That night, Kale was invited to the Gathering of Feats, a celebration of strength, both old and new. A ring of firelit platforms stood under the stars, where giants demonstrated their might. Boulder tossing, thunder sprints, stone forging with bare hands. Kale was offered the chance to participate. He declined. I've done my proving, he said. Instead, he watched and learned. He watched how each movement was a language, how each feat wasn't just pride, it was memory, tribute. Some lifted boulders not to boast, but to honor ancestors. Some shattered stone not for glory, but for grief. The giants weren't just brutes. They were storytellers of strength. As the firelight flickered and chants rose into the heavens, Vargul approached Kale again. Grogar watches you like a hawk watches a storm. I'd rather he watch than strike blind, Kale said. You know he won't let you stay, Vargul warned. Not without contest. Kale sipped the fermented root drink the giants shared. Then I'll stay even longer. A week passed. Then two. Kale learned the tongue of the giants, though rough on his throat. He sparred with the younger ones, losing often but never without teaching something in return. He walked the stone paths with the elders, asking questions instead of challenging customs. Slowly, his presence stopped being a spectacle. It became normal, except to Grogar. The Warch of Silence was heavier than his words. Then, on the 14th day, a horn blew from the northern watch. Giants gathered on the cliff ridges. Smoke curled from the distance. A rival clan, the Guldrak, had crossed into Theruin's outer territory. Their fire beasts trampled the hills. Their war signals were clear. They intended to challenge the Gorik's right to rule the lowlands. Grogar stood before the council, hands clenched. This is not a raid, he growled. This is a declaration. Then we meet it, said Vargul. And who do we send? Another counselor asked. Grogar turned his eyes toward Kale. A cruel spark lit behind them. Let the 13th seat earn its place in blood. The decision was made. A war party would ride at dawn. Kale would go with them, not as a guest, but as a warrior. That night, Kale sat alone at the edge of the plateau, staring out at the distant fires of the Guldrak. He wasn't afraid, but he wasn't foolish either. The trial stone had tested his body. Tomorrow would test his soul. Behind him, the elder approached, stepping softly despite his weight. You do not have to go, the elder said. I do, Kale replied. Even if it's a trap? Kale nodded. Especially if it is. The elder watched him for a moment. You carry something that giants often forget to train. Kale turned. What's that? The elder smiled faintly. The will to stand where no one expects you to. And as the stars turned overhead, Kale prepared. Not with weapons, but with memory. Because strength, he had learned, was never about how hard you could hit. It was about how much of the world you could carry on your back. And still walk forward. End of chapter 2. Into the Firelands. At dawn, the valley of Theroin quaked not from an earthquake, but from footsteps. The war party was assembling. 20 warriors of the Goric, giants whose names were sung in fireside chants and etched into cliff walls, stood armored in stone-forged plates. Their weapons were colossal. Hammers that could level forests, axes whose edges shimmered from volcanic tempering, and shields carved from ancient bones. And among them stood Kale, human-sized and seemingly fragile, wearing only layered leather reinforced with scaled bark from the mountain trees. He carried no great hammer, no jagged blade, just a reinforced pack, 2 curved short axes at his sides, and the same calm gaze he'd worn the day he lifted the trial stone. Grogar approached from the front lines, clad in black stone armor. His gaze bore into Kale like a dagger. "You ride with us," he said flatly. "But make no mistake, your bones will not slow us. If you fall, we will not pause." Kale nodded. "Then I'll make sure I'm ahead of you." A few younger giants smirked at the reply. Grogar did not. "Mount," Vargul called. Their steeds were thunder beasts, 4-legged, thick-skinned lizards whose breath steamed in the cold. Kale was offered none, of course. Instead, he gripped the side of Vargul's mount and hoisted himself up behind the saddle ring, steady despite the jolting steps. Vargul gave him a side glance. "You hold on well for a creature without claws," the giant said. Kale shrugged. "Claws are overrated. Grip comes from trust." With a roar of command, the war party thundered down the ridge path, leaving behind the valley and entering the scarred territories of the Firelands. The Firelands were not named lightly. They were cracked and scorched, a wasteland of dried magma, sulfur vents, and crimson fissures that split the terrain like angry scars. Volcanoes loomed in the distance, belching smoke into the sky. The Guldrak, their ancient rivals, had lived in these lands for generations. Unlike the Goric, they embraced fire over stone, brutality over tradition. Their warriors painted their skin with molten ash, and it was said their breath could ignite pitch. Kale felt the heat rising with every mile. The air grew thick, heavy. Even the beasts groaned under the weight of it. And then the drums began, far off, low and slow at first. Boom, boom, boom. A war rhythm, measured, intentional. "They know we're coming," Vargul said grimly. By midday they saw them. The Guldrak were not subtle. On the black plains of Sharnak, they stood in formation, 40 warriors, each wearing the skins of fire serpents, eyes glowing from heat bomb, weapons shaped from cooled magma and obsidian. Their leader stood at the center, atop a ridge of stone blackened by 1,000 campfires. "Skarn," Grogar muttered, hatred curling his lips. "The butcher of Cinder Hollow." Kale narrowed his eyes. Skarn was taller than even the elder, broad-shouldered, face covered in burn scars like cracked clay. He wielded a molten spear that dripped with ember blood. His presence was a challenge without words. The Goric halted at the edge of the ridge. Skarn raised his arm, and the drums ceased. Silence. Not even the wind dared to move. Then Skarn spoke. His voice was deep, hissing like steam from a broken forge. "Stone men, you come crawling to reclaim what your ancestors squandered." Grogar stepped forward. "You trespassed. You lit fires on our borderlands." Skarn laughed. "Because we can. Because your strength is old, rusted, crumbling. You hide behind stories now." Grogar growled. "Then come test them." The Guldrak slammed weapons to the earth in rhythm, a thunderous beat. Skarn grinned. "Very well. Let this be old war by old ways. Not a slaughter, approving. Choose 3. We choose 3. No armies. No chaos. One side walks away." Gasps rippled through the Goric. A trial battle hadn't been invoked in over a century. Grogar nodded once. Done. Vargul turned to him. We choose you, of course. And me. Grogar nodded. And the third. All eyes turned. To Kale. Grogar didn't ask. He commanded. You proved yourself with stone. Now prove it in fire. Kale's jaw clenched. He stepped forward. I accept. The battlefield was a circular plateau of black stone, ringed by glowing magma veins. Ritual runes were carved into the perimeter. It was a sacred dueling ground, older than either clan's memory. Giants stood on opposite ridges, watching with bated breath. Kale stood between Vargul and Grogar. The size difference was comical. Two living statues of war flanking a man who looked like a traveler out of place. Skarn and his two champions strode in. One carried dual flaming maces. The other, a glaive carved from volcanic glass. They looked as though the earth itself had forged them to kill. Vargul leaned down. Stay behind. Strike when they're distracted. Kale unslung his pack and drew out two short axes, the curved blades gleaming with layered steel, etched in his people's runes. I won't be behind you, he said. I'll be beside you. Grogar snorted. Don't die in the first blow. It would disgrace us. Kale didn't respond. The battle began with no horn, only a silence. Then chaos. Skarn lunged at Grogar like a meteor. Their weapons collided with a shockwave that rippled through the valley. Sparks and ash exploded as stone met flame. Vargul charged the glaive wielder. Their battle a dance of crushing blows and wide arcs. Kale was left facing the dual mace champion. The fire giant laughed at the sight of him. A human? This is insult. Kale didn't answer. He moved. The fire giant swung both maces down, aiming to crush him in one strike. Kale dove sideways, rolling beneath the swing, and lashed out with both axes, one biting into the back of the giant's knee, the other catching the calf. Sparks and blood flew. The giant howled. He retaliated with a sweeping kick that sent Kale flying across the stone. But Kale twisted midair, landed on his shoulder, and rolled back to his feet, sliding. Pain lit through his ribs. Something cracked. Still, he ran forward again. The fire giant swung wildly, but Kale stayed low, fast, precise. Axe to wrist, elbow, knee. He couldn't overpower, but he could undermine. Bit by bit, he cut the foundation. And finally, with a leap and roar, Kale drove both axes into the giant's lower back and pulled. The fire giant toppled forward with a crash that shook the plateau. One down. Kale, bleeding and gasping, looked toward the others. Grogar and Skarn were locked in a furious clash, the ground beneath them cracking with each blow. But Vargul was losing. The glaive wielder had carved a deep gash across his shoulder, and the giant's footing was slipping. Kale didn't hesitate. He ran. The glaive wielder raised his weapon for a killing strike, and Kale leapt from behind, swinging his axe into the attacker's spine. The glaive swung too late. Kale ducked beneath it, rolled, then rose in one smooth motion, slamming both axes into the giant's armpit, where armor was weakest. Vargul caught his breath, and with a roar, brought his hammer down on the dazed enemy's skull. Two down. Now only Skarn remained. Kale turned just in time to see Grogar falter. Skarn's spear drove into his side, pushing the warchief to a knee. Without thinking, Kale sprinted. Skarn turned just as Kale closed the gap. Little pest. Kale flung one axe, distraction. Skarn deflected it with his gauntlet. Then Kale slid forward, grabbed Grogar's fallen hammer with both hands, and swung upward with all his might. The weight of a crown. The warriors of the Gorak returned not as soldiers but as legends. When they crested the ridge into the valley of Theroin, carrying the wounded but alive Grogar and the victorious Kale, a roar of celebration surged through the cliffs and hollowed halls. The air rang with chants, the drums beat like rolling thunder, and the stone sentinels that lined the arena lit up in ceremonial fire for the first time in a century. Word had spread faster than the warriors' return, that a human had stood in fire, that a human had felled a giant, that Kale of the 13th had fought beside titans, and didn't fall. Yet for all the glory cast upon him, Kale walked in silence. He bore bruises like war paint and pain like old friends. His ribs ached with every breath, and his right hand trembled faintly from the strain of wielding the hammer that had cracked Skarn's jaw. Still, he said nothing. Victory did not make him feel proud. It made him feel responsible. The Council of Might reconvened beneath the moonlight. Grogar, arm in a sling, stood at the center, flanked by Elder Koran and the other giants who had watched from afar. "The Guldrak have retreated," Grogar announced. "Not out of fear, but because they now know we are not the stone statues they believed us to be. That we adapt. That we evolve." He turned, locking eyes with Kale, who stood at the 13th seat. "And that sometimes, strength comes from the most unexpected forms." Kale shifted uneasily under the scrutiny. Dozens of giant eyes fixed on him. The firelight flickered off their faces, reflecting approval in some, and uncertainty in others. Elder Koran stepped forward. "We have not had a challenge like this in generations," the elder said. "The old ways were tested, and through them, a new truth emerged. That a heart forged by hardship can rival a fist made of stone." He paused, then raised his voice, echoing across the cliff halls. Kale of the 13th stepped forward. Kale obeyed. "You have sat among us, fought beside us, and bled for our kin. Now we offer you what has never been offered beyond our kind." The elder raised a stone circlet, carved from the same obsidian vein as the trial stone. It was not a crown of kingship, but of title Warden of the 13th. A voice on the council, a role of equal weight to the eldest bloodlines of the giants. "Do you accept the mantle?" the elder asked. Kale looked up at the massive ring. Symbols shimmered along its edge, giant runes, and now, for the first time ever, a line of human script. His own carving, burned in by Vargul after the battle. But Kale didn't reach for it. He stepped back. "I came here to prove my strength," Kale said, "but not to rule over giants. That would be arrogance." The giants murmured, confused, some offended, some intrigued. Kale turned, facing them. "But I accept the mantle not to speak for humans. To speak for the idea that strength must evolve." Grogar watched him carefully. "Then what would you do with such a seat?" he asked. Kale looked out over the crowd. "I would build bridges." In the days that followed, Kale didn't rest. While the Gorik celebrated, he moved through the forges, the training rings, the lore halls. He watched young giants spar. He studied their architecture. He asked questions that hadn't been voiced in decades. Why are all our seats shaped for one size? Why do the war drills not include strategy games? Why do only the oldest tongues shape law? It wasn't criticism. It was curiosity. And the questions sparked discussions. Discussions led to ideas. Ideas led to tension. On the 5th day, Grogar confronted Kale in the central training grounds. "You are changing things too fast." Kale, seated on a stone bench, looked up calmly. "I'm only asking questions." "Questions become cracks," Grogar growled. "And cracks become collapse." Kale stood. "Then maybe the foundation needs reinforcement." Grogar stepped closer. His shadow swallowed Kale whole. "I fought beside you," the war chief said. "I bled beside you, but I will not watch our culture soften." Kale's gaze didn't waver. "I'm not softening it. I'm sharpening it." Grogar stared, searching his face for something. Weakness? Disrespect? Defiance? He found none. After a long moment, he turned and walked away. That night, Kale sat by the trial stone. It was silent now. Still. Its surface still bore the faint imprint of where his arms had once wrapped around it. Vargul joined him. "You do realize you're starting a war without weapons," the younger giant said. Kale gave a tired smile. "Words are weapons. And Grogar's not the kind to duel with dialogue." Kale glanced up at the stars. "I don't want power. I want perspective. That's more dangerous." Vargul laughed. "You know, when I first saw you, I thought you'd be dead by midday." Kale nodded. "I thought the same about most of you." They sat in silence a while, Then Vargul added, "The elders like you, but Grogar has the warriors." "I don't want a civil war," Kale said quietly. "Then be careful," Vargul warned. "You're becoming a symbol, and symbols invite fire." A week later, the council called an emergency session. Not because of Kale, but because the Guldrak had returned. This time not with warriors, but with envoys. They sought parley. It was unprecedented. The Guldrak had never bowed, never negotiated, never treated the Gorik as anything more than an obstacle. But now, standing within the Hall of Titans, surrounded by cold gazes and suspicious murmurs, the fire-painted emissaries spoke with unexpected calm. "We saw what your kind did," the lead envoy said. "You fought with old fury, but also with new fire. You adapted." The elder asked cautiously, "And what does that mean to the Guldrak?" "It means we've underestimated you, and perhaps we have more to learn from your kind." They turned to Kale. "You, human, you struck down Skarn. You wielded strength without hate. We would speak with you alone." The chamber cleared. Only Kale and the Guldrak emissaries remained. The lead one removed his ash helmet, revealing a surprisingly youthful face, marred by heat lines and burns. His eyes were yellow like melted gold. "You should be dead," he said plainly. Kale nodded. "So I've been told. And yet you carry weight like it was air." Kale said nothing. "We came to conquer, but now, some of us wonder what we might gain by listening." Kale studied him. "You want alliance." The Guldrak emissary gave a small nod. "Or something new? A council?" Kale asked. "Between fire and stone?" The emissary smiled faintly. "Maybe not today, but soon." He looked at Kale's hands. "Your kind may not be many, but one of you has done more than armies." As the emissaries left, Kale stood alone in the silence, and realized he had become a bridge not just between size and strength, but between fury and future. That evening the Gorik held a feast. Not for war, but for possibility. The drums beat not in warning, but in welcome. For the first time, a Guldrak emissary sat at the outer ring of the gathering fire. And Kale sat beside both giants and former enemies. He didn't wear a crown. Didn't need to, because true weight wasn't on the head. It was on the shoulders, and he carried it willingly.